In the earliest ages of Tamriel's long and winding tale, before banners of empires were stitched and before guilds carved their names in a parchment and coin, there existed something more elusive than armies or treaties. It was a shadow that lingered at the edge of firelight, the hand that brushed a coin from a purse, the quiet bargain whispered where no scribe dared record. It was not yet a guild, nor even a union, but a tendency of mortals and mare alike, the irresistible draw toward secrecy, toward possession without permission, toward the power of taking rather than being given. When one gazes across the centuries, it is easy to see the rise and fall of kingdoms, the building of white stone walls, the crowning of kings. Yet beneath those chronicles, beneath the grandeur, another current always flowed. For hunger gnawed at the bellies of the poor, and greed stirred the hearts of the powerful. A loaf of bread left upon a windowsill, a jewel glittering in a noble's hall, a scroll bound in wax within a scholar's chest. These were temptations as old as the races of Nirn themselves. And where temptation dwells, so too does the thief. But let us move slowly, for our tale is meant not as a shout upon the battlefield, but as a murmur in the quiet night. Imagine, if you will, the ancient streets of Tamriel, cobblestones slick with rain, wooden shutters drawn tight against the cold. Somewhere in the soft hours before dawn, a figure passes unseen, feet lighter than the falling mist. A latch gives way to patient fingers, and a purse shifts its weight as unseen hands make their claim. The act itself is small, yet it carries the resonance of 1,000 such moments across the provinces, each a thread in the weaving of an invisible tapestry. Before the guild was named, there was no organization, no codex of conduct, no hierarchy of masters and initiates. There was only necessity. The farmer who stole seed from his neighbor, hoping to feed his own children. The beggar who learned that nimble fingers could fill a belly more swiftly than prayers. The sellsword who slipped into a warlord's tent, not to kill, but to take the purse of gold left carelessly by the bedside. Each acted alone, yet their deeds were kin to one another, as though bound by some unseen hand. The divines watched, it is said, though they offered no judgment. For Debella tends beauty, Mara tends love, and Zenithar honors labor, but none claim dominion over the shadows. It is left to Nocturnal, the mistress of shadows, to smile upon such endeavors. Though her worship was hidden, her presence was felt in every stolen glance, in every lifted coin, in every secret that passed unseen. Even in those early centuries, some whispered that theft was not merely survival, but a kind of worship, a reverence for the art of vanishing, a hymn sung without sound. And so Tamriel learned that power does not only rest upon thrones or in the strength of swords. Power also gathers in silence. It pools in hidden corners, where secrets are traded and debts are owed. One could not chart it on a map, nor count it in a census, but it was there all the same, growing unseen in the hearts of those who thrived in darkness. Imagine a tavern in a forgotten village, long since lost to history. A soldier leans heavy upon the table, his wages clinking in a careless pouch. Across the room, a hungry child watches, eyes sharp, hands trembling. The pouch disappears, the soldier never knowing the loss until morning. That child grows into a man or woman, hardened by necessity, guided by instinct, sharpened by countless acts of daring. Multiply that tale by thousands, and you begin to glimpse the unseen population of Tamriel. Men and mare who live by wit, by stealth, by shadows. This, then, is the soil from which the Thieves Guild would one day rise. Not from noble decree, nor from scholarly intent, but from the uncounted and the unseen. From hunger, from greed, from the quiet knowledge that wealth, when locked behind doors, calls as loudly as a bell. The guild story begins not with crowns or banners, but with those nameless figures who crept through alleys, who vanished into the dark, who survive in the cracks of empire and kingdom alike. And so we linger here in the beginning, in the nameless centuries when thieves walked alone, unbound by brotherhood, yet united by necessity. The guild itself was still far away, a dream waiting in the folds of shadow. But its roots were already there, hidden beneath every stolen coin, every whispered secret, every step that passed unheard. Thus begins our journey, not in the blinding light of history's triumphs, but in the half-light where Tamriel's forgotten first learned the language of shadow. Though the shadows of Tamriel were filled with solitary figures, each walking their own path of secrecy and survival, it was inevitable that these paths would cross. For in the tangled streets of the cities, and along the narrow alleys of port towns, thieves began to glimpse one another, sometimes as rivals, sometimes as silent companions in the same dark endeavor. And though they were wary, though they guarded their secrets as jealously as the coins they stole, the whisper of something greater stirred among them. A thief, after all, does not survive long when standing alone. The guards of kings and nobles sharpened their vigilance. The Fighters' Guild patrolled streets where coin flowed. Merchants devised clever locks and watched their ledgers with hungry eyes. Against such watchfulness, a lone pickpocket or smuggler often met an early end. But a thief who had an ally, who could share a warning, or distract a watchman, or pass along knowledge of which doors opened easily, such a thief stood a far better chance of seeing the dawn. Thus the first unions of shadow were born. They were not yet called guilds, nor did they bear any sigil or name. They were small circles, no more than a handful of souls, bound by fragile trust. By the glow of tallow candles and hidden cellars, they shared stolen bread and coin. They whispered of guards who slept too heavily, of caravans that left unguarded, of noble houses where doors remained unlocked. Their voices were hushed, not out of reverence, but out of necessity. For to be discovered was to be hanged, and silence was a thief's most reliable companion. It is said that in Cyrodiil, where the beating heart of the Empire would one day rise, these gatherings first took on the semblance of permanence. In the river city of Laoian, smugglers carried silks and spices upriver from elsewhere, and there, thieves found opportunity. In Bravel, poor and desperate, entire families learned the craft of picking purses, passing the art from parent to child as though it were a trade no different than blacksmithing. In Anvil, sailors and dockworkers formed secret brotherhoods, ensuring that cargoes might go missing without blame falling too heavily on one set of shoulders. It was not only in Cyrodiil. Across Skyrim's cold towns, snowbound and watchful, whispers told of hunters who traded more than pelts, slipping knives into pockets when merchants looked away. In Hammerfell's coastal cities, where Red Guard sailors haggled fiercely, rival gangs of thieves plotted not only to steal, but to outwit each other, weaving rivalries as intricate as the knots of their ships' rigging. And in the ashen land of Morrowind, under the shadow of Red Mountain, Dunmere houses warred endlessly with coin as much as with blades. There, too, the shadows thickened, and those who walked in them began to find kinship with one another. Still, these were fragile bonds, easily broken. For what is trust among thieves, when each hand is so skilled at deception? Some gatherings dissolved in betrayal. Some ended in violence, as ambition outweighed loyalty. Yet, slowly, the lesson was learned. Secrecy, when shared, could become strength. A thief who stood alone was easily crushed. A network, however small, might outlast the anger of guards and the suspicion of merchants. It was in these fragile circles that the first customs of shadow were born. A glance held too long might mean danger. A coin placed at a crossroads could mark a meeting place. A carved symbol upon a doorframe, meaningless to most, could tell a careful eye that safety waited within or that an ally had passed nearby. These were not yet the elaborate codes that would later flourish, but the roots of a language built in silence, meant for those who could not afford to speak aloud. Legends say that Nocturnal herself smiled upon these gatherings. In the still hours, when smoke drifted from guttering candles and thieves spoke softly of their next foray, some claimed to feel her presence like a chill across the back. Was it blessing or merely the fear of discovery? None could say. Yet the idea took hold. that perhaps the shadows themselves wished for unity, that perhaps the art of theft was more than survival. Perhaps it was a calling. And so, without banners, without halls, without scribes to record their deeds, the first shadow brotherhoods of Tamriel began to take shape. Fragile though they were, they carried within them the seed of something greater. A seed that, in time, would grow into the Thieves Guild, an organization as enduring as the Empire itself, and in some ways, far more elusive. But for now, we linger still in those earliest days when the Guild was no more than a whisper, a rumor passed from lip to lip in the dark. A future still unborn, yet already stirring in the restless silence of Tamriel's nights. In time, the scattered embers of Tamriel's countless small brotherhoods began to glow more brightly. A thief in Laoian might hear of another circle in Bravel, or a smuggler in Anvil might whisper of kindred shadows working the streets of the imperial city itself. These were not yet the Guild of Legend, but the beginnings of a larger flame. The first gatherings of rogues who sought more than survival. They sought permanence. They sought power. For what is theft but a solitary act, unless it is joined to others? A single purse cut is a fleeting victory. A lone burglary may fill a belly for a week. But together, a dozen thieves could cripple a merchant's fortune. Together, smugglers could starve the coffers of a city while filling their own. And together, Whispers could travel faster than guards could march, carrying warnings, secrets, and opportunities across provinces. The earliest gatherings were crude. In taverns where the lanterns burned too dim, thieves met by chance, recognizing in each other a familiar air, the restless glance, the fingers that lingered too long near a coin pouch, the wary posture of one accustomed to life at the edge of danger. With nods and small gestures, with words spoken carefully over mugs of sour ale, they tested one another. Could this stranger be trusted? Would a partnership yield gold or betrayal? Many such experiments ended in failure. Some thieves found themselves betrayed to the guards by their own companions. Others fell victim to rivals who turned blades upon them for a larger share. Yet even these failures taught lessons. And slowly, in the crucible of mistrust, a certain wisdom emerged. That rules must exist, however fragile, if thieves were to work together at all. So, among the earliest gatherings, customs began to take shape. A thief who stole from another thief risked banishment, or worse. A rogue who betrayed a companion to the watch could expect no mercy when caught by their fellows. And above all, silence was sacred. No name, no deed, no place of meeting was to be shared beyond the circle. These were not yet the codified laws of the Thieves Guild, but the first fragile threads of discipline. It was during this time that stories began to spread of leaders, men and mere who stood taller in the eyes of their companions, not by strength of arms, but by cunning and charisma. Some claimed such figures were chosen by Nocturnal herself, marked by the shadows as her favored. Others believed they were simply clever rogues who saw the value of unity where others saw only rivalry. Whatever the truth, these leaders became the hearthstones of the first organized bands, binding small circles into something greater. In Cyrodiil, one such figure was whispered of, a woman known only as the Blackbird. She gathered cut purses, smugglers, and burglars beneath her wing, demanding loyalty but rewarding it richly. In Skyrim, tales spoke of the Night Fox, who led a network of thieves across Windhelm's narrow alleys, weaving them into a family that outwitted even the most vigilant guards. And in the Ashlands of Morrowind, Dunmere rogues spoke of the Grey Viper, a master of disguises who shifted identities as easily as one might change a cloak. Whether these figures were real or myth, no one could say with certainty. Perhaps they were legends woven afterward, symbols of the change that was already underway. For across Tamriel, the lone thief was giving way to the band, and the band was giving way to something larger still. Imagine now a cellar beneath a tavern, the walls damp with mildew, the air thick with smoke. A dozen thieves gather, not as strangers, but as companions. Each offers what they know. Which caravan will depart at dawn? Which merchant keeps keys hidden beneath his pillow? Which noble feasts tonight and leaves his strongbox unwatched? Coins pass from hand to hand, not as spoils, but as tribute, a share given so that the circle may thrive together. Such was the rhythm of these early gatherings, primitive yet powerful. In these places, for the first time, thieves began to think of themselves not as scattered outcasts, but as a hidden society. A society with rules, with leaders, with secrets worth protecting. And though the world above went on, with kings making laws and generals waging wars below, in the cracks and corners, something enduring was taking root. Thus dawned the age of gathering. The shadows were no longer 1,000 lonely threads. They were beginning to weave together, strand by strand, into the first faint outlines of a cloak that might one day cover all Tamriel. If Tamriel is the body of the world, then Cyrodiil is its beating heart. Roads from every province converge there, carrying spices from elsewhere, gems from Skyrim, silks from Somerset, and weapons forged in the deep forges of Morrowind. Gold flowed like blood through its veins, and wherever gold flows, shadows are never far behind. It was in Cyrodiil that the first whispers of true permanence began to take shape for the Thieves of Tamriel. The Imperial City was a place of grandeur, white towers, sweeping bridges, and markets so vast that even the poorest could find something to sell. Yet beneath that splendor lay desperation. For every noble whose banquet groaned with food, a dozen beggars starved on the cobblestones. For every jewel that glittered on a lady's neck, there were eyes in the alleys fixed upon it, weighing hunger against risk. The divide between wealth and want was sharper in the heart of the empire than anywhere else. And in that divide, thieves found endless opportunity. The city's guards patrolled in gleaming armor, their footsteps echoing down the stone avenues. Yet even their vigilance could not reach every corner. The waterfront, with its crooked docks and rickety shacks, became a haven for smugglers. The market district, crowded and noisy, gave cover to nimble hands that darted among coin pouches. In the labyrinth of sewers beneath the city, where torchlight seldom reached, entire communities formed, places where the law's hand was slow to enter. These were the places where whispers of brotherhood took root. At first, they were no more than rumors, tales of thieves who no longer worked alone, who pooled their knowledge, who shielded each other from the guards. But soon, the rumors proved true. In the back rooms of taverns and in the darkness of the sewers, rogues began to gather with purpose. They shared not only spoils, but protection. A thief captured by the watch might find, upon release, that allies had hidden a small purse for them, ensuring survival until the next venture. Debts were honored, secrets preserved. Slowly, trust grew. Out of these bonds, early leaders rose, not kings nor lords, but figures whose word carried weight. Some were chosen for their cunning, others for their generosity, and some for the fear they inspired. They set rules. No thief would betray another to the guard. No thief would strike against a companion's kin. And every venture would be shared, not hoarded. These codes were not written in parchment or stone, but in silence and in blood. To break them was to invite punishment swifter than any the empire itself could deliver. Legends claim that one of the earliest great gatherings in Cyrodiil took place beneath the imperial city itself, in a forgotten cistern that echoed with dripping water. Dozens of thieves, smugglers, and tricksters gathered there, their faces half-hidden, their voices lowered to murmurs. By candlelight, they pledged themselves to secrecy, swearing upon shadows that they would stand together against the world above. Whether myth or truth, the tale spread across the empire, whispered from one rogue to another like a secret password. Cyrodiil's thieves also began to develop something more subtle than brute alliance, a language of symbols. Chalk marks upon doorframes, scratches carved into wood, stones placed just so along a street. To most, these signs were meaningless. To the initiated, they spoke volumes. Safe house, danger, target, ally. In this silent tongue, a network began to knit itself across the imperial city, so that a thief might travel from the market district to the waterfront, guided only by marks invisible to the untrained eye. It is no surprise, then, that Cyrodiil became the model for what would one day grow into the Thieves Guild. The Empire's heart was too rich, too central, too full of opportunity to remain untouched by the shadows. And as caravans came and went, as merchants traveled outward to Skyrim and Hammerfell and beyond, so too did the Whispers travel, carried by rogues who learned in Cyrodiil and brought those lessons back to their homelands. Yet the guild was not born in an instant. These were still early days, fragile and uncertain. Rival bands vied for dominance. Betrayals still cut deeply. The Watch grew ever more vigilant, and the prisons of Cyrodiil were never empty. But through it all, the seed of something greater endured. For in the heart of the Empire, thieves were no longer simply individuals, surviving day by day. They were a network, a hidden society, a shadow that, once formed, could not easily be banished. Thus, from Cyrodiil, the whispers spread, not only of thieves, but of thieves united. And though few yet spoke the words Thieves Guild, the shape of that future was already visible in the shimmering torchlight of the sewers and in the silent marks carved into the walls of the Empire's capital. In the world above, kings proclaimed their laws with heralds and banners. Generals spoke through orders shouted across battlefields. Merchants announced their bargains in crowded markets, and priests preached the will of gods from high pulpits. But thieves had no such luxury. Their lives depended not on voices raised, but on voices withheld. To survive, they required silence. And out of that silence, something remarkable was born. A language of shadows, woven not in words, but in marks, glances, and unspoken understanding. At first, these symbols were crude. A chalk line scratched beside a door might mean safe shelter within. A circle drawn in dust upon a wall might warn of guards too watchful to approach. Stones arranged in a certain pattern could mark a path, guiding a thief from one alley to the next. They were small, almost invisible, yet they carried meaning as sure as any written script. In time, these signs grew more elaborate, passed from one gathering to the next, until they formed the beginnings of what came to be known as the Silent Network. Imagine a thief traveling from Bravel to Laoian, uncertain of the city's alleys, unfamiliar with its guards. To the untrained eye, the walls were bare, the doors unremarkable. But to one versed in the silent tongue, every corner spoke. Here is a place to hide. Here, beware of betrayal. Here, an ally waits with open hand. The city unfolded like a secret map, known only to those who lived within its shadows. This network did more than guide footsteps. It gave thieves a sense of belonging beyond their small circles. For the first time, a rogue might step into a foreign city and find, without words, that they were not alone. A carved symbol, faint and weathered, whispered of kinship. We are here. You are among friends. Such signs offered more than safety. They offered identity, as though the very stones of Tamriel conspired to shelter those who walked outside the law. The Silent Network also extended beyond marks on walls. Thieves learned to read gestures, to recognize allies by the tilt of a head, the tap of a finger, the pause of a glance. A tavern crowded with strangers might conceal two thieves speaking an entire conversation with nothing more than the placement of a mug or the folding of a cloak. To those outside, it was meaningless. To those within, it was as clear as sunlight. And so, the Silent Network became the lifeblood of the shadows. It spread quietly, like roots beneath the soil, unseen yet nourishing. In every province, variations took form, shaped by culture and custom. In Hammerfell, sailors carved runes into ship timbers, guiding smugglers to hidden caches. In Skyrim, hunters etched faint marks into trees, marking paths where guards seldom strayed. In Morrowind, ash-stained walls bore subtle sigils that only a Dunmare thief could read. Each region spoke its own dialect of silence, yet together they formed a tapestry of hidden communication that spanned Tamriel. There were, of course, those who tried to break this secrecy. Guards grew suspicious of strange scratches on doors, of symbols carved into stone. Some were erased, some misinterpreted. Yet the network endured, adapting with every generation. For each mark erased, 2 new ones were made, cleverer and more obscure. The shadows, once given language, would not fall silent again. Legends whisper that Nocturnal herself inspired these codes, teaching her chosen the art of speaking without sound. Whether true or not, many thieves came to regard the silent network as sacred. To deface a mark meant to betray not only one's companions, but the mistress of shadows herself. And so, the language was guarded fiercely, passed down like ritual, taught only to those who had earned the trust of the Brotherhood. The beauty of the silent network lay not only in its secrecy, but in its endurance. Wars swept across Tamriel. Empires rose and fell, but the marks remained. Centuries later, a thief might stumble upon a symbol carved by hands long turned to dust, and still, its meaning would be clear. In this way, thieves achieved a kind of immortality. Their voices carried not in history's grand tomes, but in scratches upon stone, whispers in alleys, signs hidden in plain sight. Thus, the network became more than a tool. It became the thread that bound thieves across the provinces, the invisible cloak beneath which they all could gather. Without it, the scattered circles might have withered, undone by betrayal and isolation. With it, they became a society, hidden yet united, their presence felt in every city though seldom seen. And so, the guild's true foundation was laid, not in treasure hoards, nor in the rise of great leaders, but in silence itself. A silence that spoke louder than words, carrying meaning across the empire, weaving together the scattered shadows of Tamriel into something enduring, something powerful. Every society, no matter how hidden, is measured by its coin. Kings minted it, merchants weighed it, priests collected it, and soldiers demanded it. In Tamriel, gold was the pulse of civilization, the steady rhythm beneath all its grand endeavors. And it was inevitable that the shadows would learn to guide that rhythm, bending it toward their own survival. For in the beginning, theft was an act of desperation. A purse lifted meant a meal for a night. A ring stolen meant firewood for a week. But as the silent network spread and thieves began to see themselves not as scattered rogues, but as part of a larger society, they also began to recognize the greater truth. Wealth was not merely something to steal. Wealth could be shaped. Wealth could be controlled. Merchants learned this lesson the hardest. In Cyrodiil's great markets, a caravan arriving from Hammerfell might find half its cargo missing before the dawn. A jeweler in Anvil might wake to discover his most prized gem vanished without a trace, only to be approached later by a mysterious figure offering to recover it for a fee. Soon, merchants realized that to fight against the shadows was often costlier than to bend to them. Many began to pay for protection, slipping coins quietly into hands unseen, ensuring their goods traveled safely and their shops remained untouched. Thus the thieves discovered a new art, not simply taking, but taxing. In taverns and alleys, whispers spread of shadow markets, hidden gatherings where stolen goods were traded as freely as bread in a village square. These markets were never permanent. One night, they might be held in a cellar beneath the imperial city, another in the caves near Bravel, another in the abandoned storehouses of Anvil's docks. There, a sword stolen from a noble might be exchanged for a bag of grain, or a bolt of silk might pass into the hands of a smuggler bound for Somerset. What began as simple theft had become a system of commerce, thriving parallel to the empire's lawful trade. Gold, too, became a weapon within the Brotherhood itself. In the earliest gatherings, each thief kept what they stole. But now, many circles demanded a share, a portion of every purse, every jewel, every coin lifted from unsuspecting hands. This tribute, small when given alone, became great when gathered together. With it, thieves could bribe guards, purchase safe houses, or fund greater ventures. Slowly, the idea took hold that a thief's success was not merely personal, but part of a greater treasury that strengthened the whole. The more gold flowed through these networks, the stronger the Shadow Society became. Guards once incorruptible found themselves tempted by heavy purses. Dockmasters looked the other way when smugglers unloaded their cargo. Even some nobles, whispered to be drowning in debts, turned to thieves for assistance, allowing stolen wealth to mingle freely with that of the law-abiding. In this way, the line between lawful and unlawful began to blur. The guild-to-be did not simply live beside the Empire's markets. In many places, it became their hidden twin, a mirror economy that reflected and at times rivaled the one above. Some saw in this a kind of justice. The poor, who could never afford the wares of the rich, found stolen goods more accessible in the shadow markets. A beggar who could not buy a loaf of bread from a merchant might find one in the hands of a smuggler, purchased cheaply with a few meager coins. Though the nobles cursed the loss of their finery, the common folk often saw the thieves less as enemies than as strange benefactors. Yet not all was harmony. Wealth brought ambition, and ambition brought conflict. Rival bands clashed over routes and markets. Disputes flared into bloodshed when tribute was withheld. Still, out of such strife came order. Slowly, leaders began to establish rules not only of secrecy, but of economy. Who could trade in which markets? How much tribute must be given? Which goods were forbidden to touch, lest they draw the wrath of nobles too powerful to risk offending? Piece by piece, a system took shape. Thus, the shadows learned what kings and merchants had always known. Gold is power. And in the hands of thieves, it was a power far subtler than blades or armies. It could buy silence. It could buy loyalty. It could buy survival. In the end, it was not the dagger that made the Thieves of Tamriel endure. It was the coin, glinting softly in the dark, carrying with it the promise of safety, influence, and permanence. And so, from hunger and desperation, the Shadow Society had grown into something far greater. No longer content with mere survival, the thieves had discovered their true strength. They did not simply take from Tamriel's wealth. They had begun to shape it, to bend it, to weave it into a cloak of power that stretched across provinces. A cloak that, in time, would be known as the Thieves Guild. For a time, the Thieves of Tamriel thrived in their hidden markets and whispered networks. They passed gold from hand to hand, traded in secrets as though they were jewels, and moved through the shadows with a confidence their ancestors had never known. But shadows, by their nature, exist only in relation to light. And as the thieves grew bolder, their presence could no longer remain invisible. Those who lived in the light, nobles, merchants, and guilds sworn to law, began to notice the weight of the unseen hand that plucked at their coffers. The nobles were the first to feel the sting. For centuries, their halls had stood as fortresses of wealth. Yet time and again, jewels vanished, heirlooms disappeared, and gold slipped away as though spirited by ghosts. At first, these losses were dismissed as misfortune, accidents of careless servants or corrupt stewards. But as whispers spread that entire networks of rogues were at work, the nobles grew restless. They demanded greater vigilance from their guards, stronger locks upon their chests, and harsher punishments for those caught in the act. The merchants, too, raised their voices. They had learned to bargain with the shadows when it suited them, paying tribute for safe passage or quiet protection. Yet many began to chafe under the weight of constant demands. A merchant who traded in Leoin might find himself paying to the thieves there, only to be forced again to offer coin upon entering Bravel, and once more when his goods reached the imperial city. What had begun as quiet understanding grew into resentment, as though an invisible tax had been laid upon every road and port. In response, the lawful guilds were stirred to action. The Fighters' Guild, proud defenders of order, began to clash openly with thieves. Contracts were taken not only for protecting caravans, but for hunting those who stalked them. Sword met dagger in the back alleys of Tamriel cities, the clang of steel breaking the silence of the night. Even a mage's guild, more distant from the daily struggles of common folk, grew wary. They knew well that scrolls, tomes, and enchanted trinkets were as tempting as coin to those who moved in shadows. Rumors tell of entire libraries being sealed with wards, not against rival scholars, but against thieves who sought knowledge to sell in hidden markets. The empire itself, bound by its laws, could not ignore the growing tide. Edicts were proclaimed, decrees written in fine ink upon parchment. Bounties were raised for thieves, and gallows stood waiting in city squares. Yet for every rogue caught, another stepped into their place. The silent network was too vast, too deeply rooted. The shadows could not be scoured by law alone, for every time the light struck one corner, the darkness simply gathered elsewhere. This tension between law and shadow, nobility and secrecy, order and subterfuge, shaped what would become the Thieves Guild's true strength. For the rogues of Tamriel learned that power was not simply in coin, nor in silence, but in balance. They could not afford to draw the full wrath of the nobles, nor to provoke open war with the guilds. They needed to remain unseen, not in their presence, but in their influence. To push too far would be to invite destruction. To remain too meek would be to fade into nothing. And so, new rules were spoken in whispers. No thief would take so much from a single noble that the family's ruin would bring armies to the street. No smuggler would allow their goods to so disrupt lawful markets that merchants turned fully against them. Tribute would not be pressed beyond reason, for greed that shouted too loudly drew the sword more swiftly than silence. These limits were not born of mercy, but of wisdom, the wisdom that survival meant balancing the weight of shadow against the weight of law. Some even whispered of secret arrangements, that nobles, tired of endless theft, quietly employed thieves to disrupt their rivals instead. That certain guards were paid not to protect, but to guide rogues toward more favorable targets. That the Fighters Guild, though sworn to fight them, occasionally found its members tempted by bribes heavy enough to dull their swords. None of these whispers can be proven, yet their very persistence suggests that in the space between law and crime, a great balance had taken root. Thus, the thieves of Tamriel learned to walk a narrow path. Too bold, and they would be crushed by the weight of empire. Too timid, and they would lose their power. In this delicate dance, the true shape of the guild began to emerge. Not merely a gathering of rogues, but a hidden force that understood power's most vital lesson, that it must be wielded not in excess, but in careful measure, as one balances upon a blade's edge. As the thieves of Tamriel grew bolder, they discovered that survival required more than silence and shadows. To endure, they could not remain merely outlaws, forever hunted and despised. They needed to carve for themselves a place in the order of things, not openly, not with banners or proclamations, but in quiet acknowledgement. They needed legitimacy, though of a peculiar kind. Legitimacy born not of law, but of necessity. The nobles, for all their wrath, began to recognize a truth that many dared not speak aloud. To battle the thieves endlessly was to drain coffers and exhaust guards. For each rogue dragged to the gallows, another rose from the slums to take their place. The Shadow Society was like water. One could strike at it, scatter it, even freeze it for a time, yet always it returned, flowing back into the cracks of Tamriel cities. Some nobles, wearied by this endless struggle, began to strike bargains instead. It often began quietly. A chest of gold vanished from a manor, only to be returned days later after a discreet meeting. A rival shipment was delayed, not by storms or beasts, but by unseen hands working in the night. In return, the nobles' own stores went untouched. Slowly, the relationship shifted. The thieves ceased to be faceless enemies, and instead became tools. Dangerous, yes, but useful. With their aid, rivals could be weakened, debts collected, secrets silenced. The very nobles who had once cursed the shadows began, in secret, to rely upon them. Merchants, too, found themselves drawn into this balance. To refuse tribute was to risk ruin, yet to pay it offered a strange kind of safety. Smugglers ensured that their goods reached the right hands. Thieves made troublesome rivals disappear from the marketplace, and shadow markets offered goods at prices lawful trade could not match. Many merchants grumbled, yet they continued to pay, for to deal with the shadows was often more profitable than to resist them. Even the guilds of law could not remain untouched. The Fighters Guild, ever proud of its honor, found its contracts dwindling when merchants turned instead to shadow protection. The Mages Guild, concerned with knowledge, realized that tomes thought lost sometimes resurfaced in the hands of thieves, who, for the right price, were willing to return them. And though the empire thundered with edicts, though gallows still stood, the truth could not be denied. The thieves had woven themselves so deeply into the fabric of Tamriel that to tear them out entirely would unravel more than it repaired. It was during this time that the idea of the Thieves Guild as an institution began to take shape. No longer were they merely a scattering of rogues, each driven by hunger or greed. They began to see themselves as something more enduring, a hidden counterweight to law, a society that thrived not by defying the world, but by shaping its undercurrents. Their codes grew stricter, their organization firmer. Leaders spoke of business, not banditry. Tribute became less theft and more tax, a payment for protection and balance. Of course, not all accepted this quietly. Some thieves resisted, preferring the freedom of solitary life. Some nobles refused to bend, declaring open war on the shadows. But the tide was slow and steady, and in time, even the fiercest resistance yielded to the weight of necessity. For in truth, the guild was not claiming legitimacy in the eyes of law. It was claiming inevitability. And perhaps this inevitability carried something of the divine. Many whispered that Nocturnal herself guided the guild's hand, shaping it into more than a gathering of rogues. To her faithful, the guild's endurance was proof of her blessing, that shadows would always have a place in Tamriel, as eternal as night itself. Thus, the Thieves of Tamriel stood at a threshold. No longer faceless outcasts, yet not openly acknowledged, they had become something paradoxical, a hidden institution, hated in words yet tolerated in deeds, despised in daylight yet courted in secrecy. They were the dagger kept sheathed, the shadow admitted but never named. This struggle for legitimacy was never about laws written in stone. It was about survival, about weaving the guild so tightly into the fabric of Tamriel that to pull it free would leave the whole tapestry in tatters. And in that they succeeded. For from this time forward, the Thieves Guild was not merely a band of criminals. It was an enduring part of the world, as much a fixture as the guilds of law, the courts of nobles, and the halls of the divines. The shadow-born society that began in the heart of Cyrodiil could not remain bound to a single province. Gold is restless, and so too are those who seek it. As merchants crossed borders and caravans carried goods across mountains and seas, so too did the thieves follow, spreading like whispers through the taverns and marketplaces of Tamriel. What had once been a collection of hidden markets and secret deals within the Empire's center began to unfurl across the provinces, adapting to the customs and dangers of each new land. In Skyrim, the guild found both hardship and opportunity. The Nords, proud and suspicious of outsiders, were quick to brand thieves as dishonorable, cowards who struck from shadow rather than facing danger with an axe in hand. Yet Skyrim's frozen cities, with their bustling mead halls and crowded markets, proved fertile ground for rogues. Riften, in particular, became a haven. Nestled beside its lake and protected by layers of corruption, it offered fertile soil for the guild's growth. Here, the thieves learned the art of subtlety not only in crime, but in influence. A jar of mead paid for silence. A purse of gold kept the guards looking the other way, and soon, beneath Skyrim's harsh snows, a quiet network flourished. Far to the east, in Morrowind, the thieves faced challenges unlike any other. The Dunmere houses, proud and ancient, ruled with iron hierarchies and bitter rivalries. Here, the guild could not simply steal openly or tax indiscriminately. for the houses crushed what they could not control. In the cracks between those rivalries, opportunities blossomed. Some houses found it convenient to employ thieves against their rivals, while others turned a blind eye to smuggling along Vardenfell's coasts. It was here that the guild learned the art of patience, of bending before greater powers rather than being broken by them. Though never as dominant as in Cyrodiil, the thieves of Morrowind endured, carving out their niche in the shadow of the tribunal's power. Hammerfell brought its own lessons. The Red Guards valued honor in combat, despising theft as cowardice. Yet their sprawling coasts and endless deserts offered countless paths for smuggling. In Sentinel and Rahad, shadow markets thrived, fed by goods carried on swift ships and caravans that crossed the Alakar. Here, the guild became less a society of cut-purses and more a brotherhood of smugglers, guiding contraband across seas and sands, finding in Hammerfell a different face of shadow, one shaped not by the alleys of cities, but by the vastness of open trade. In Valenwood, the forests themselves seemed to resist the guild's grasp. The Bossmare, bound by the Green Pact, lived in harmony with their wilds, and theft of food or resources was fraught with taboo. Yet even here, shadows crept. In cities like Falinesti and Woodhearth, merchants sought luxuries forbidden by pact or law, and the guild was there to provide them. Silks from Somerset, spices from elsewhere, weapons smuggled from distant lands. The thieves became quiet brokers in trade that skirted both tradition and decree. Elsewhere, in Blackmarsh, the guild found less fertile soil. The Argonians, secretive and deeply tied to their homeland's marshes, offered little room for outsiders to establish lasting networks. The guild's presence was faint, more rumor than reality, and the swamps themselves seemed to swallow thieves whole. Still, even in Blackmarsh, whispers tell of smugglers' paths winding through the reed-choked waters, carrying goods where no lawful caravan dared tread. Thus, the Thieves Guild spread across Tamriel, not as a uniform body, but as a tapestry of adaptations. In each land it bent to local custom, never rigid, never fixed, always reshaping itself to endure. Where brute force would fail, it learned subtlety. Where subtlety faltered, it embraced trade. And in this way, the guild came to reflect Tamriel itself, diverse, divided, yet bound by unseen threads of shadow. For the guild was never a single blade, but a constellation of daggers, each gleaming in its own corner of night. Some burned bright in Skyrim's corruption, some glimmered faintly in the depths of Morrowind, some flickered along Hammerfell's coasts. Together, they formed a network that spanned provinces, linking cultures that otherwise clashed, weaving Tamriel together not in law, but in shadow. And through it all, the lesson endured, that the guild's strength was not in open conquest, but in quiet adaptation. As Tamriel shifted, so too did the thieves. As the world changed, they flowed with it, like water finding new paths, never ceasing, always enduring. The Thieves Guild, though united in shadow, was never a monolith. As its tendrils reached across Tamriel, the guild became less a single body and more a constellation of branches, each rooted in its own soil, each shaped by the culture it sought to exploit. And as with all things that grow apart, divisions emerged. For though thieves may share in shadow, their ambitions often pull them into conflict. In Skyrim, the guild found itself steeped in corruption, its leaders more concerned with personal profit than balance. Riften, that city of waterways and secrets, became both haven and prison, for its thieves grew so entangled in their own disputes that whispers of betrayal echoed in every tavern. Gold flowed, yet much of it stuck to the fingers of those at the top, leaving resentment among the ranks. To the guilds of Cyrodiil, Skyrim's branch seemed bloated and self-serving, a reflection of the Nord's brashness twisted into shadowed greed. In Morrowind, the opposite was true. There, the guild's strength lay in restraint, in quiet patience and survival beneath the gaze of the great houses. Yet this caution often bred contempt from thieves in other provinces. To the smugglers of Hammerfell, the Dunmare branches appeared timid, too bound by politics and fearful of the tribunal's wrath. To Skyrim's rogues, they seemed shackled, more servants of noble houses than true thieves. But in truth, Morrowind's guild endured where recklessness would have led to ruin, teaching the lesson that survival sometimes requires the stillness of shadow rather than the strike of a blade. Hammerfell, with its sea-born smugglers and desert runners, stood apart from both. There, the guild was less a hierarchy and more a brotherhood of equals, bound by the dangers of sea and sand. To them, Skyrim's corruption was weakness, Cyrodiil's orderliness an illusion, and Morrowind's restraint a kind of cowardice. They prided themselves on freedom, but freedom often bred discord, and their loose bonds sometimes frayed when profits turned lean. Even among the Bossmare of Valenwood, where the guild existed in smaller, quieter forms, tension simmered. They resented the heavy hand of Cyrodiil, which often demanded tribute from their meager profits, and bristled at being seen as little more than a distant outpost. To them, their work in weaving forbidden trade was every bit as vital as Skyrim's corruption or Hammerfell's smuggling. Yet they were often dismissed as insignificant in the greater web of shadow. It was in these rivalries that the true fragility of the guild revealed itself. For though united by nocturnal shadow, each branch followed its own path, its own customs, its own loyalties. Sometimes, these differences flared into open conflict. Caravans protected by Hammerfell smugglers might find themselves raided by Skyrim's rogues. Secrets purchased in Morrowind could be sold again in Cyrodiil, undercutting the authority of local thieves. Even whispers of assassination passed between provinces as leaders sought to weaken rivals and claim greater influence. And yet, for all this division, the guild never shattered entirely. Perhaps it was fear of losing Nocturnal's blessing, or perhaps it was the recognition that survival demanded some measure of unity. When threats grew too great, when the Empire raised its hand, or when guilds of law turned their eyes upon the shadows, the branches of the Thieves Guild remembered their kinship. In times of danger, rivalries quieted, and messengers traveled swiftly through hidden roads, carrying pleas for aid, promises of shared profit, and reminders that no branch, however strong, could endure alone. Thus the guild endured, though never without strife. Its strength lay not in harmony, but in resilience. Like a tapestry woven of mismatched threads, it was full of knots and frays, yet held together by the tension itself. Rivalries sharpened it, forcing branches to adapt, to grow cleverer, to guard their power more jealously. And in that constant struggle, the guild learned to survive not as a single kingdom of thieves, but as a shifting chorus of voices, bound by shadow, divided by ambition, yet tied to one another by necessity. For such is the nature of thieves. They are not kings upon thrones, nor priests in temples, united beneath doctrine. They are wanderers, cut purses, smugglers, and spies. Their unity is not one of love, nor even trust, but of need. And though rivalries may flare, though betrayal may whisper, the guild endures, for in the shadows of Tamriel, even discord can be shaped into survival. In the beginning, the Thieves Guild was a scattered web, 1,000 whispers, 100 hidden dens, each branch bending to its own customs. Yet, as rivalries grew, and as power shifted between provinces, there arose a need for something greater. Without guidance, the guild risked collapse into chaos, its branches tearing at one another until nothing remained. Out of this necessity, a structure emerged, not openly, not proclaimed upon parchment, but silently, like a shadow settling over the land. The first leaders of this hidden order were rarely known by name. They cloaked themselves not in titles of nobility or priesthood, but in masks of silence and rumor. To the thieves of Skyrim, they were faceless voices from the south. To the smugglers of Hammerfell, they were unseen hands that weighed scales of profit. To the careful branches of Morrowind, they were distant arbiters, guiding with a whisper rather than command. And though each province clung fiercely to its independence, the shadow of this hierarchy stretched slowly across them all. Its design was elegant in its subtlety. Rather than a single throne, it was a ladder of secrets. At the base stood the cutpurses and lookouts, those whose hands were quick but whose reach was short. Above them, fences and smugglers, who moved stolen goods from shadow to shadow. Above these, lieutenants who commanded crews, gathered tribute, and kept order within their districts. And above them still, figures known only in rumor. Masters of shadow, coordinators of the guild's far-reaching web. Each province shaped this ladder in its own way. In Skyrim, where corruption ran deep, the ladder was riddled with bribes, each rung greased by gold. In Hammerfell, it was looser, less rigid, more a council than chain. In Morrowind, it intertwined with the politics of the great houses, each step shadowed by noble influence. Yet despite these differences, the idea endured. The guild was not chaos, but a hidden order, unseen yet binding. The hierarchy was not enforced by law, nor by steel. It was enforced by shadow. Those who defied it often vanished, their names forgotten, their bodies never found. Betrayal was punished not by trial, but by disappearance. Loyalty, however, was rewarded, not always with wealth, but with survival, with protection, with the quiet assurance that one's family, one's secrets, and one's life were guarded by the unseen hand of the guild. To those within, this structure gave a sense of belonging. A cutpurse in a distant village might never see the masters who ruled from shadows, yet they knew that their coin, their tribute, their silence contributed to something larger. They were part of a tapestry woven across Tamriel, a secret order that endured where kings fell and empires trembled. Yet this silent hierarchy was fragile. It was built not upon loyalty in the heart, but upon necessity in the hand. A thief might serve their master today, yet tomorrow turn to betrayal if coin or power shifted. The leaders of the guild knew this, and thus they ruled not with open chains, but with threads of fear, respect, and inevitability. To leave the guild was to stand alone against shadow, and few who tried found long survival. And so the Thieves Guild, once scattered and quarreling, began to breathe as a single body. Its heartbeat was hidden, its voice hushed, yet its influence grew steady. Like the roots of a tree spreading unseen beneath the soil, the hierarchy bound together what had once been separate. To the outside world, it remained an enigma, lawless rogues, bickering criminals. But within the shadow, thieves knew the truth, that behind every dagger, behind every stolen coin, behind every whispered deal, there was an order patient and enduring. The silent hierarchy became the guild's backbone, the unseen spine that allowed it to stand against the storms of Tamriel. It did not erase rivalries, nor did it end betrayal, but it gave the thieves of Tamriel something they had never possessed before, a shared identity, a structure that could survive beyond the lifespan of any single rogue. And in this, the guild took its next step, from scattered gangs to hidden provinces to a society that spanned an empire, cloaked in shadows, yet as real as any throne of stone. With the silent hierarchy in place, the guild began to recognize another need. Shadows may bind thieves together, but without rules, those shadows could quickly turn to chaos. A rogue who steals from their kin invites ruin. A fence who betrays a buyer endangers the whole network. A brash thief who slays without purpose brings the wrath of guards and nobles alike. And so, in the hush of candlelit chambers, whispered not in proclamation, but in rumor, there arose a code. It was never written upon parchment, nor carved in stone. To inscribe, it would invite discovery. Instead, the code lived in words passed from mentor to apprentice, from master to initiate, carried in oaths sworn quietly in shadowed rooms. It was a law without law, binding not by decree, but by tradition. Those who followed it thrived. Those who broke it often vanished, their fates serving as lessons whispered to the next generation. The first rule was simple: do not steal from the guild. This law, repeated endlessly, was the foundation. The guild was built upon trust and shadow. A purse snatched from a stranger was profit. A purse taken from a fellow thief was treachery. To steal from kin was to unravel the web, and so it was punished with exile or worse. The second rule was caution: do not draw needless attention. The guild thrived in silence. A reckless act, a murder in the open, a robbery too brazen, threatened to bring watchful eyes upon them all. Thus, thieves were taught to be whispers, not shouts, shadows, not flames. Violence was permitted, but never celebrated. The blade was for necessity, never vanity. The third rule was loyalty. Tribute must flow upward. Each cut purse, each smuggler, each burglar owed their share to those above. This was not greed alone, but survival. The silent hierarchy required fuel, and that fuel was coin. With tribute came protection, safe houses, fences, silence purchased from guards, retribution upon enemies. To withhold, it was to step outside the shadow, to face the world without the guild's hand. The fourth rule was reverence, respect the night mistress. Though not all thieves were devout, Nocturnal's name carried weight. She was seen as the patron of shadows, the guardian of luck both cruel and kind. To scorn her was to invite misfortune. Shrines hidden in back rooms, tokens carried in pockets, and oaths sworn beneath her gaze kept alive the sense that thievery was not merely crime, but a craft sanctified by shadow itself. Other rules varied by province. In Skyrim, it was forbidden to strike deals without the guild's sanction. In Hammerfell, smugglers swore never to betray the routes of their kin. In Morrowind, discretion in dealings with noble houses was paramount, for the wrath of a house could doom more than one thief. These differences mattered little in the grand web, yet each shaped its branch uniquely, like threads dyed in many hues. The punishments for breaking the code were as silent as the code itself. There were no courts, no proclamations, only absence. A thief who betrayed the guild might vanish on a midnight walk. A smuggler who withheld tribute might never return from the desert. A cut purse who turned blade upon kin might be found floating in the river, eyes closed as though in sleep. Fear was the enforcer and rumor the judge. Yet for all its harshness, the Code of Shadows gave the guild its endurance. It instilled order where chaos might have reigned, and gave purpose to those who lived in twilight. Thieves knew their boundaries. Apprentices learned not just skills, but a way of life. In this code, a thief could find belonging, a place in the shadows, a role in the great unseen order. And thus, the guild became more than scattered criminals. It became a society bound not by open laws, but by whispered rules, by traditions unspoken yet deeply felt. The Code of Shadows was their invisible scripture, not carved in temples, but etched into the very rhythm of their lives. Through it, the guild could endure betrayal, survive rivalry, and outlast kingdoms. For shadows shift, but the code remains, passed from tongue to ear, from elder to initiate, as eternal as night itself. As the centuries turned, the Thieves Guild shifted once more. Where once it lived as a network of rogues, cut purses, and smugglers, bound by silence and code, it began to cast its shadow further, reaching into halls of power. Kings and councils, lords and magistrates, all found their walls less sturdy when shadow crept within. For coin, unlike blade or spell, slipped easily through cracks, and the guild had learned well the art of making cracks. In Cyrodiil, the Empire's very heart, the guild's hand grew deft at manipulation. Magistrates who spoke too loudly against smuggling found their families threatened by invisible purses cut open. Taxes levied against merchants mysteriously vanished before reaching coffers. Even guards, those sworn to uphold law, found themselves on the guild's payroll. The guild became less a gang of thieves and more a quiet rival to the Empire itself, operating beneath its nose, turning its officials into puppets bought with shadow coin. In Skyrim, the guild's influence was rougher, yet no less potent. Riften became its jewel, a city where law bent under the weight of bribery, where jarls turned blind eyes, where even merchants feared the consequences of refusal. Beneath the stone keeps of Whiterun and Solitude, whispers told of hidden dealings, of coin that shifted allegiance, of guild-favored merchants prospering while rivals withered. Skyrim's guild, corrupted though it was, wielded its influence openly, its shadow sometimes so heavy it resembled daylight itself. Morrowind required more subtlety. There, the guild learned that brute force availed nothing against the great houses. To survive, it became a spider at the edges of noble webs, slipping into gaps left by politics. It courted minor houses, offering services where loyalty was thin. It smuggled secrets as easily as contraband, turning information into currency. And in time, whispers spread that some house rivalries were sharpened not only by tradition, but by thieves who knew when to tip the scales. Hammerfell proved fertile for influence as well, though its people prided themselves on independence. There, the guild cloaked itself in trade, embedding within the merchant fleets and caravans that stitched desert to sea. Its bribes ensured that tariffs fell away, that inspections grew lax, that rival merchants were quietly sabotaged. More than once, a fleet found its sails cut or its anchors sabotaged, not by storm, but by shadow. And though suspicion often fell upon the guild, proof rarely followed. Valenwood and Elsewhere, though distant from the Empire's heart, became vital threads in this growing age of influence. Bossmare thieves learned to profit from the passage of lumber and rare game, while Khajiit smugglers perfected the art of moving moon sugar, turning it into an empire of shadow trade. Nobles in distant courts discovered that certain luxuries flowed only when the guild willed it so, binding even rulers to the guild's silent leash. Yet the guild was careful. It did not seek to rule, for ruling was visible, and visibility was death. Instead, it sought to influence, to bend outcomes without appearing in the story. A magistrate dismissed, a tariff lowered, a rival merchant ruined, a house distracted by sudden scandal. The guild's hand was everywhere, yet nowhere. Its victories were silent, its spoils taken not in crowns or thrones, but in coin, security, and silence. This age of influence gave the guild power beyond what its founders could have dreamed. It was no longer merely surviving in shadows. It was shaping the very world that cast them. Rulers who mocked thieves often found their reigns curiously shortened. Nobles who scorned shadow found themselves bereft of wealth. Even the empire, vast as it was, could not entirely untangle its heart from the threads the guild had woven. But with influence came danger. For shadows, one stretched too far, risked tearing. And though the guild grew strong in its manipulation of lords and courts, its expansion into politics would bring both triumph and peril. For those who steal too deeply from kings may one day find themselves facing more than watchmen in alleys. They may find the wrath of empires. Power, once grasped, seldom comes without cost. For the Thieves Guild, the age of influence brought wealth, protection, and reach beyond imagination, yet also birthed dangers more subtle, more treacherous than the watchman's blade or the noble's guard. For when thieves begin to meddle in courts and councils, they invite the notice of forces far greater than themselves. The first price was suspicion. In Cyrodiil, whispers reached the ears of the Elder Council. Too many taxes lost, too many magistrates compromised, too many guards suddenly enriched. At first, suspicion fell upon rival nobles, but over time the pattern emerged. Wherever coin disappeared, wherever corruption spread like ivy, the guild's shadow lingered. The empire, vast though it was, could no longer pretend that the thieves were mere rats in alleys. They were architects of silence, shaping the empire itself. The second price was betrayal. With greater influence came greater temptation. Some thieves, entrusted with delicate webs of bribes and secrets, found it easy to turn their position to personal advantage. They skimmed coin mint for tribute, or sold secrets twice, once to the guild and once to its enemies. Others grew drunk on their power, imagining themselves untouchable, and in their arrogance, they broke the code of shadows. For each betrayal, the guild responded with silence. a disappearance here, a body there, but every act of treachery weakened the delicate fabric that bound them. The third price was rivalry. Other forces, criminal and noble alike, looked upon the guild's influence with envy. In Morrowind, the Cammona Tong sharpened their knives, determined to drive the guild out by force and fear. In Skyrim, mercenary companies and rival gangs struck back, unwilling to kneel before thieves. Even among nobles, rival lords who could not bribe the guild to their side instead sought to expose it, to purge it, to tear down its shadow empire. The guild, once free to move unseen, found itself beset on every side by foes eager to cut its threads. The fourth price was corruption within. As the guild grew richer, its leaders grew ever more distant from the cut purses and smugglers who formed its roots. Gold flowed upward, but it did not always flow back down. In Skyrim's Riften, leaders became notorious for hoarding wealth, enriching themselves while their underlings starved. In Cyrodiil, disputes over tribute erupted into violence. The guild's strength had once been its unity, but power divided it, pitting thief against thief, branch against branch. And yet, for all these dangers the guild endured. Its hierarchy absorbed betrayal. Its code punished arrogance. Its shadows silenced enemies. Like a tree in storm, it bent but did not break. For every leader corrupted, another rose from below. For every rival who struck at the guild, another deal was forged to blunt their blade. The guild had learned patience, and patience was its greatest shield. But the greatest price of all was visibility. The guild had always thrived in darkness, unseen, whispered of but rarely confronted. Now, with its influence reaching nobles and courts, it could no longer hide so easily. Kings whispered of it in council. Emperors grew wary of its reach. Even the divine patrons of justice and order were said to have turned their gaze upon it. For when shadows grow too large, even the brightest torches cannot help but reveal them. Thus the Thieves Guild entered a new era, no longer only a society of rogues, no longer merely a shadow economy, but a political force whose hand brushed dangerously close to crowns and thrones. It had power unlike any before, yet each coin it gained, each noble it swayed, came at a cost. And the guild, though patient, could not ignore forever the truth whispered among its wisest thieves, that every shadow cast by power is also a shadow that may one day be pierced by light. No empire, not even one woven in shadow, exists without rivals. As the Thieves Guild expanded its reach, it found itself mirrored, opposed, and entangled by other powers, some criminal, some noble, some both. To dominate the night was never uncontested. Every shadow cast by the guild was met by another striving to claim it. In Morrowind, the guild's greatest foe was the Cammona Tong. Unlike the guild, which cloaked itself in subtlety and code, the Tong thrived on brutality. They ruled through fear, their loyalty bound not by whispered rules, but by blood and violence. To them, the Thieves Guild was an intrusion, an outlander's infection in their homeland. Wars flared in alleyways and taverns, unseen by nobles yet felt in every smuggler's den. Guild thieves who strayed too far often vanished, their bodies left as warnings. And though the guild resisted, it was clear that in Morrowind, shadows were already claimed, and to trespass was to invite wrath. In Skyrim, the guild found its rivals not in ancient orders, but in families whose wealth rivaled kingdoms. The Blackbriar dynasty of Riften stands as the most infamous example. Merchants turned crime lords, their influence stretched through mercenaries, bribes, and whispered threats. The guild and the Blackbriars wove a relationship half alliance, half rivalry, each dependent on the other, yet ever watchful for betrayal. Maven Blackbriar herself, sharp as any dagger, turned the guild into her tool, while the guild in turn used her name to shield its dealings. It was a partnership of necessity, forged in corruption, where loyalty was as thin as parchment. In Cyrodiil, rivalry came not from gangs, but from guilds of another sort. The Dark Brotherhood, assassins draped in silence, often crossed paths with the Thieves Guild. Though their crafts differed, one stole life, the other coin. Their markets overlapped. Both prized secrecy, both moved through shadows, and both despised exposure. Tensions simmered in cities where contracts clashed, where a thief's silence was broken by a blade meant for another. Though rarely outright enemies, the two guilds regarded each other as predators forced to share the same dark forest. Elsewhere, smaller rivals sprang like weeds. In Hammerfell, pirate bands along the Abyssinian Sea sought to choke guild trade. In Valenwood, wild bands of Bosmary hunters disrupted smuggling paths. In Elsewhere, independent Khajiit caravans sought to move moon sugar outside guild tribute, their freedom clashing with the guild's demand for order. Each rival chipped at the guild's edges, forcing it to defend its shadow borders as kingdoms defended their lands. Yet rivalry was not always war. At times, the guild turned enemies into partners, binding them with coin or threat. Smuggler bands who refused tribute often found themselves starved of routes until they bent the knee. Nobles who scorned the guild sometimes awoke to find their rivals suddenly enriched, and in gratitude, the guild's hand was taken. Even the brotherhood, grim as they were, found uses for thieves who could provide passage, information, or distractions. Rivalry was constant, but so too was negotiation, for in shadows, survival demanded compromise as often as conquest. But these rivals shaped the guild as much as they opposed it. Against the Camona Tong, the guild learned the limits of expansion. In Skyrim, its partnership with the Blackbriars taught it the danger of reliance. In Cyrodiil, wary coexistence with the Brotherhood reminded it that the night was never owned, only shared. Each rival sharpened the guild's craft, tempered its ambition, and reminded it that shadows are never singular. They overlap, entangle, and consume one another. Thus, the Thieves Guild endured not as a solitary empire, but as one voice in a chorus of darkness. Its influence was vast, but always challenged, always checked. In that contest lay its greatest truth, that survival was not found in conquering every rival, but in learning when to strike, when to bargain, and when to fade into the silence of night. The Thieves Guild did not endure centuries by strength alone, nor by cleverness alone, but by a quiet mastery of survival. It learned, through pain and persistence, that shadows were not invulnerable havens. They shifted, they clashed, they betrayed those who dwelled within them. From rivals, the guild absorbed hard lessons, each etched into its memory as deeply as a scar into flesh. From the Camona Tong, the guild learned humility. For all its cunning, the guild could not seize every corner of Tamriel. Morrowind's shadows belonged to another, and there the guild could never truly thrive. Attempts to root itself in that land often ended in blood and failure. The lesson was bitter, but necessary. To survive, the guild had to know where it could not stand. Not every city was a ripe purse. Some were knives waiting to cut open the hand that reached too far. From the Blackbriars, the guild learned caution. To ally with power was tempting. For Maven's wealth and ruthlessness shielded the guild from law. Yet that alliance was a leash as much as it was armor. The guild became tied to her ambitions, its independence eroded by her influence. In time, thieves whispered that Riften's branch no longer served the guild, but Maven herself. The lesson was clear. Partnerships with the mighty must be entered with care, for the hand that offers protection may one day close into a fist. From the Dark Brotherhood, the guild learned coexistence. At first, rivalry seemed inevitable, two secretive orders sharing the same night. Yet bloodshed between them threatened both, drawing unwanted attention. Over time, boundaries were carved. The Brotherhood would kill for coin, but leave thievery alone. The guild would steal, but refrain from meddling in contracts of death. The lesson was balance, that sometimes survival meant sharing the shadows, not claiming them. From smaller foes, the guild learned vigilance. Pirate captains, mercenary bands, wandering smugglers. None could topple the guild alone, but their persistence wore upon it. Caravans had to be watched, sea routes guarded, tribute enforced. In these constant skirmishes, the guild learned that survival was not a grand victory, but an unending watchfulness. To sleep, even for a season, was to risk losing all. Yet survival was not merely about defense. The guild learned patience, to let rivals consume themselves. Many foes who burned bright with ambition soon withered, undone by their own excess. A rival gang might rise and hammer fell, only to collapse when its leaders grew greedy. A noble might spurn the guild, only to beg for aid when debts consumed them. By waiting, by watching, by striking only when the moment was right, the guild endured where others perished. These lessons wove into the guild's very being. Its code became more than silence and secrecy. It became a philosophy of endurance. Never overreach. Never trust protection blindly. Never invite unnecessary conflict. Never sleep. Patience is wealth. Caution is survival. Shadows are not conquered. They are shared. In this, the guild's wisdom resembled that of Tamriel's oldest forces. Just as rivers carve mountains not by strength, but by persistence, the guild shaped its fate by patience. Just as forests endure storms by bending, not breaking, the guild endured by adapting. It did not claim immortality, but it claimed longevity, a presence that outlasted kings, empires, and rivals alike. Thus, through conflict and compromise, through betrayal and alliance, the Thieves Guild honed the one art greater than theft itself, the art of survival. And so it remained, even as centuries passed, a shadow that never vanished, only shifted. For while thieves could be killed and branches destroyed, the guild's memory endured, carrying its lessons forward to every hand that reached into the night. Every empire leaves behind its myths, and the Thieves Guild, though born in shadows and silence, was no different. For the common folk, who rarely saw its hand yet felt its touch in vanished coins or missing heirlooms, the guild became less a society of mortals and more a tapestry of legends. Its deeds, whether true or imagined, passed from lips to ears in taverns, marketplaces, and campfires, taking on the shape of myth. Some whispered that the guild was older than the empire itself, born from the first mortal who dared to steal fire from the gods. Others claimed its founder was no man or mare, but a Daedra cloaked in rags, testing the greed of mortals. The truth mattered little, for myths, once told, carried their own kind of reality. One tale spoke of the Gray Fox, a name that lingered through generations. To some, the Gray Fox was immortal, an undying master thief who walked Tamriel for centuries, stealing crowns, relics, and even destinies themselves. To others, he was many men and women, each donning a cursed cowl that erased their name and replaced it with the mantle of the fox. In Whispers, it was said he had once stolen an Elder Scroll itself, though how such a feat was possible none could say. True or not, the legend of the Gray Fox became inseparable from the guild's myth, proof that in shadows, one could ascend to eternity. Another tale spoke of a secret treasury hidden somewhere beneath Cyrodiil. There, the guild supposedly hoarded not coin, but the most impossible of stolen goods, dragon bones, Aeolid crowns, the heart of a Daedric prince. Sailors swore that pirates who betrayed the guild were dragged there in chains, never to return. Some said the treasury was guarded by shadows given form, loyal only to the guild's whispered passwords. Whether it existed or not, the story inspired awe, and sometimes fear in those who heard it. Others told softer tales, bedtime myths for restless children. They spoke of a kindly thief, a ghost who visited the poor, leaving behind bread, trinkets, or coins stolen from cruel lords. Parents told such stories not to frighten, but to soothe, painting the guild not as cut purses, but as unseen guardians of the downtrodden. Whether the guild ever deserved such honor was uncertain, but the myth endured, lending thieves a strange aura of reluctant heroism. Among nobles, the tales took darker shapes. They whispered that the guild could steal not only gold, but secrets from the soul. that its spies could slip through locked doors of the mind, plucking confessions from dreams, that a guild master once held a noble's very shadow hostage, ransoming it back for a king's ransom and gems. Such myths, though absurd, carried weight, for nobles lived in fear of the unseen, and the guild thrived on that fear. Through all these stories, wild, contradictory, impossible, the guild became more than a society of thieves. It became a symbol, a living story whispered across Tamriel. Its true deeds were often lost, blurred by rumor, but the myth endured stronger than the fact. And in truth, the guild welcomed such stories. For myths are the best armor of all, harder than steel, lighter than leather, and impossible to kill. Thus the Thieves Guild, draped not only in shadow, but in legend, stepped into eternity. Whether it truly was eternal mattered little. For as long as folk whispered in fear or in hope of thieves unseen, the guild would live in the imagination of Tamriel, as real as any crown, as enduring as any empire. Myths alone are missed, but when they settle upon the minds of mortals, they shape the world. The legends of the Thieves Guild did not remain idle whispers in taverns. They became threads woven into the culture of Tamriel, into songs, plays, prayers, and fears. The guild, though hidden, became a presence in art and imagination as enduring as any crowned monarch. In Skyrim, bards often sang of thieves as tricksters. Around hearth fires, travelers would hear tales of cunning rogues who outwitted jarls, guards, and even dragons. Though told with laughter, such songs carried a subtle awe, for who else but the bold could make a fool of rulers and walk away unscathed? The guild's presence in such stories blurred the line between villain and folk hero, turning thieves into figures of admiration, especially among the poor. In Cyrodiil, street theater often echoed these themes. Traveling troops would stage plays where the gray fox, cloaked in mystery, danced across rooftops, stealing from corrupt lords while sparing the common folk. Nobles frowned at such performances, but crowds gathered in delight, finding hope in the idea that even the high and mighty could be humbled. For many, the gray fox became less a thief than a symbol of balance, proof that justice might come not from courts but from shadows. In Morrowind, the influence was harsher. Songs of the Cammona Tong drowned out any praise of the guild, and where thieves were spoken of, it was with venom. Yet even there, children whispered daring stories of masked burglars slipping through the webs of the great houses. Though the guild itself struggled against rivals, the idea of it lingered, an unwelcome but persistent echo that the Tong could never fully silence. In Hammerfell, sailors wove their own lore. They spoke of the guild as a brotherhood of phantom corsairs, appearing in fog to strip ships of cargo without spilling blood. Superstitious captains hung charms on their masts, small tokens meant to appease the silent hands, as they called them. Whether the guild had any hand in these legends mattered little. The sea carried stories like driftwood, shaping belief where fact could not. Even in temples, the guild's shadow could be felt. Priests of Dibella warned against the seductions of wealth stolen in darkness. Priests of Stender thundered against the thieves as enemies of law. Yet in the shrines of Nocturnal, quiet offerings of coin, feather, or crow feather were left by those seeking favor in secret endeavors. And though the guild never called itself a religion, the rituals surrounding Nocturnal often mingled with its myth, turning thieves into something closer to worshippers than criminals. Children, too, grew up with echoes of the guild. Parents threatened misbehaving sons and daughters with stories of the Shadow Man, who would steal away naughty children as easily as he stole purses. Yet other parents softened the tale, telling of the kindly thief who left bread on empty windowsills. In this way, the guild became part of childhood, a presence as familiar as bedtime prayers or family legends. Even languages carried traces. Phrases such as Fox's Blessing or Guild Shadow crept into everyday speech, tokens of respect or superstition. A traveler might warn a friend not to boast of gold, lest the guild be listening. A merchant might excuse a missing coin as a gift to the shadows. In this way, the Thieves Guild became not only a legend, but a proverb, a symbol embedded in thought itself. Thus, culture across Tamriel bore the fingerprints of thieves unseen. Songs, plays, curses, blessings, and prayers all carried echoes of the guild's myth. And though rulers sought to erase such stories, they endured, for the common folk carried them in memory. The guild may have lived in darkness, but in culture, it glowed like a hidden ember, warming imaginations for generations untold. Empires rise and empires fall, their banners burned, their legacies scattered in dust. Yet in the quiet between such upheavals, another legacy endures, one not written in marble or ink, but in whispers in vanished gold, in footsteps that left no mark. This was the legacy of the Thieves Guild, a shadow that outlived kings. When historians traced the movements of armies, they overlooked the quieter paths carved by the guild. Yet for every fortress razed, there was a vault robbed. For every law decreed, there was a ledger altered. In subtle ways, the guild threaded itself into Tamriel's history, leaving marks that were seldom acknowledged yet deeply felt. It was not a power of banners, but of influence, not a crown upon a head, but a coin slipped from a purse. Its legacy was not only theft, but survival. Where other organizations crumbled under the weight of their own ambition, the guild bent, adapted, and endured. Its memory was carved into lessons passed from thief to thief, codes of silence, patience, and vigilance that shaped lives far beyond the walls of guild halls. Each new generation inherited not riches, but wisdom, how to move unseen, how to wait, how to endure. The guild's name echoed in every corner of Tamriel, but often in contradiction. To nobles, it was a stain, proof of weakness in law, a corruption that gnawed at order. To common folk, it was sometimes terror, sometimes hope, sometimes both at once. To rival criminals, it was a standard to challenge, a shadow to overcome. Yet in each of these perceptions, its influence endured. Even those who despised the guild could not ignore it. Even those who denied it gave it form in their fear. But perhaps the deepest legacy lay in the myths, for myths endure where history fades. The gray fox, the kindly thief, the cursed cowl. These tales would outlive the names of emperors, carried in songs and stories told long after the deeds themselves were forgotten. A thief, nameless and unseen, could achieve immortality through rumor alone. In this way, the guild secured what kings coveted most and seldom achieved: eternity in memory. Yet the guild's legacy was also paradox. For an organization born in secrecy, it was remembered by all. For a society that rejected law, it became part of the cultural order itself. For a brotherhood that claimed nothing, it left behind legends as enduring as any monument. This contradiction defined its place in history, a reminder that shadows are never truly empty. They hold echoes of what has passed. In the end, the Thieves Guild's legacy was not measured in treasure, nor in power, but in its ability to linger, unseen yet undeniable. It shaped Tamriel without ruling it, haunted lords without confronting them, uplifted the poor without crowning itself savior. It was, and remained, what it always had been, a shadow on the world, eternal in its silence. As dawn follows night, so too does silence follow song. And so, in the telling of the Thieves Guild, we come to the end of shadows, though not their vanishing. For shadows never vanish. They shift, they soften, they wait. The Thieves Guild was never meant to be immortal in form. Leaders rose and fell, guild halls burned, alliances frayed. Yet beneath every ruin lay the seed of renewal. For shadows are patient. They creep back when the light grows weary. And so, the guild lived not in permanence of stone, but in the persistence of secrecy. Legends told of the gray fox, yet none knew his true face. Tales of the kindly thief spread, yet none could prove her hand. Myths of treasuries and curses endured, though their truth was uncertain. In this uncertainty lay the guild's greatest strength. For what cannot be seen cannot be destroyed. What cannot be proven cannot be erased. It became less an organization than an idea, and ideas, once born, linger beyond the reach of kings. Thus the guild became eternal, not through dominion, but through memory. It threaded itself into lullabies and curses, into tales told by firelight, into the unguarded fears of rulers who locked their vaults twice at night. Even where its presence waned, its name persisted. To whisper the guild was to invoke more than thieves. It was to call forth the very possibility of resistance, cunning, and survival in a world of towering powers. And what of Tamriel in all its shifting ages? Empires would fall, provinces would rise and rebel, gods themselves might vanish, and new faiths take their place. Yet somewhere, in a shadowed alley or beneath the cobblestones of a market square, a figure would wait. A hand would slip unseen into a purse. A voice would whisper a vow of silence. In that moment, the guild would live again, no matter the age, no matter the empire. The eternal shadow was not merely the guild itself, but what it represented. The truth that no power, however absolute, could erase the quiet defiance of the unseen. Kings ruled with law, priests with faith, armies with swords. The guild ruled with nothing, and in that nothing lay its permanence. For shadows require no crown, no temple, no fortress. They only require light, and as long as light exists, so too will shadow. And so, listener, as the night deepens and the world softens into silence, remember this: the Thieves Guild is more than thieves. It is a story of survival, of cunning, of the unseen thread that binds ages together. Stories such as these do not end, for endings belong to empires. Shadows, like dreams, return with every nightfall. Close your eyes and imagine the sound of a quiet step in an empty street, the faint rustle of a cloak brushing past, the soft clink of a coin unseen. Perhaps it is nothing. Perhaps it is everything. In that stillness, the Thieves Guild waits, eternal, invisible, and near. Thus ends a tale. Thus continues the shadow.